every decision to delay, defer, or request additional information during a planning application increases the cost, uncertainty, and viability of a development project. Local plans set out policies for economic development growth. The performance of planning authorities is fundamental to delivering a local plan's growth ambitions. Do officers and/or elected members have any understanding of the commercial risks that result from the decisions they make? I think this question is linked around the experience of deferrals, an application being, put down the road requiring more information, which makes the risk in planning greater, where more uncertainty. And so are the officers or the elected members, I suspect, equally influential in this? Are they aware? Do they have training in the implications of those decisions? David, this one's for you.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, and it links back to an earlier one about resources as well. And I'm not here to make excuses about resources, because I saw a number of the questions were around resourcing. And the current administration in my own authority have put additional funding into planning and planning enforcement as well, recognising that challenge. And the government recently have made some announcements through DLUC about £1 million additional support for local planning authorities to try and improve upon staffing, resources and skills and things in terms of placemaking, which is a positive sign as well. So there's a recognition that has been an issue in the past. The other challenge, every day I get inundated with requests from recruitment companies asking for, do we want agency staff? And so many people have left local authorities and gone linked up with agency staff, and so many authorities are now employing those people to do a lot of their work, and we don't particularly want to go down that route. But the question around understanding, yes, I mean, I myself have to sit on a number of different boards internally about our own capital programme, and I recognise all the challenges of those schemes and the pressures of viability and the impact that things like planning requirements have on those schemes. So, and that information is shared amongst officers so that they realise what the implications are of that additional bit of work. Often it will come from consultees, though, about that further information about the archaeological finds or the Natural England requirements on a particular site. But there is a recognition of that implication. With members, we've got an election next week, local election. There's going to be a whole load of new members arriving. We've got a set of training program set up throughout the year with modular training on planning matters. And within that, there'll be a session on economic viability and the understanding about the pressures that are faced by development industry across the country, not just in the Bay. So we try and get that information across. And Tony, you deal with applications in the Bay. You've seen the way certain planning committees conduct themselves, and I've got to be very careful what I say in this sort of environment. But we try and brief them. We try and get across all the pressures that are there and the balance of considerations. But generally, a lot of the recommendations that our own committees go with. Decisions go with recommendations, but it's an important aspect to make sure our elected members, especially with a whole new lot coming in, is there. And I do think there is a recognition of that, and it's not just officers asking for additional information for the sake of it. It's usually come as a result of either something lacking or as further evidence required from a consultee. But there is a recognition of the implications of delays, and from the moment I started at Torbay, I wanted to change the culture in terms of extensions of time. There seemed to be almost an expectation that an EOT would be asked for in every application. It's supposed to be the exception to the rule. It's supposed to be because there are real reasons why you need additional time, not because you're taking some holiday or whatever. I mean, there needs to be a good justification for it, and you're all very good at agreeing those, but I think I've been challenging my own staff in terms of requesting those when there doesn't seem to be good justification for it.
Okay, so I just had a question come in. I was going to respond to that myself, but it's not my job. I'm the host, not a contributor. So I'm just going to frame this slightly differently. So the question initially was, our officers and elected members are aware of the implications, commercial implications, the decisions they make. And obviously none of the rest of our panel can really comment on that because they don't. But I'd just like to pose to the three of you remaining whether you feel there's any scope that we as professionals could be working with local authorities, offering our own versions of, I don't know, CPD or something like that, just giving them the opportunity to come out and see what we do and the implications of what we do. I don't know whether that's something that would be viable, but how do you feel about that, Justin?
It'd be great to see that greater understanding. I think it's really helpful to have David's comments on it. I don't know. I'm just sort of surmising based on what our experience of certain local authorities at certain times with the resource they have at that time. We haven't actually dealt with Torbay recently, David, but in other areas we've had a mixed bag of experience, really. I think for me it's the speed. I mean, you talk about the consultees. I hear that the consultees are going to ask for more information. But for us, our experience is it's just the speed of that turnaround. Tell us what you need, and we can go away and get it. But if it's left for 2 or 3 weeks and then requested, or something's requested fairly quickly, and then we wait another 2 weeks for something else, then it does naturally delay it. I mean, I think you touched on committee decisions there. I having been in a number of committee decisions and seen the way that or some of the questions that are asked, that planning officers, that is their job. They understand it through and through, are able to, they know the answers to a lot of these questions that are being raised in committees. It does strike me as a slightly odd system we've got where that decision is sort of taken away from the officers who understand it through and through. I don't think we're going to solve that today for sure, but it would be lovely to see more commercial understanding, and I feel when the response I get is like you're saying, David, is resource. Well, we've all got issues with resource, and when we have when the commercial implications of some of the delays are as big as they are, that we should be doing more about it, because it's costing so much to us in planning delays. That if there was a requirement for a bit of extra resource, if we could have that conversation and understand what can be done to speed things up, or it'd be so much more helpful. But at the moment, I just don't feel like I've got clarity on what the problem is, and that's why this is great today, to try and understand a bit more about it.
Can I just clarify that Justin isn't offering a bung there, David?
I took it that he wanted to enter into a planning performance agreement, Tony, which we are doing a lot more of. And I have to say, I hope you're experiencing that other local authorities. That does give you the opportunity for backfilling the resource and making sure that the officer you're getting is dedicated to the project you're working on. We've got a couple of examples at the moment with big, the redevelopment of the hospital in Torquay, for example, where that planning performance agreement is paying for the replacement of that person that's dealing with that. And that is another way to make sure we don't lose resource and we don't overpromise and underdeliver on our planning performance agreements. But that gives the clarity to get those timescales in there, to have a timetable of what work's going to be done by when. And I think that gives you and your clients a bit more certainty as to when things will be determined and when meetings will be held and things. So we do encourage that, even on smaller projects as well.
That's great. Thank you. Duncan, so I'm just going to reiterate where these questions tend to sort of just drift off a bit. So just dragging it back to the commercial understanding of the decisions being made. Do you feel anything that the legal sector could do to contribute to supporting local authorities through that?
I think there's a big bit about the management of the expectations of members, and I think it links a little bit back to what Justin said about, the officer goes through it, they've spent however long, whether that's under a planning performance agreement or that's the officer that's already sort of paid for. That's a different argument. Get to the committee stage, and then all sorts of other bits and pieces sort of start flowing out. We're brought in to do the Section 106 after the event, and the number of times I said, well, where was that in the officer's report? Where was that in the committee decision that justified that? And someone's just sort of thrown it in as a good idea, and again it sort of adds to the uncertainty. So I think training is important in all of these things. I think we are in danger sometimes of letting perfection stand in the way of good enough. I think people, possibly at officer level, possibly at a greater to a greater degree at member level, are worried that a decision that they take is going to come back and bite them, and there's almost a sort of paralysis or a an inertia problem that they say, well, actually, it's better to not make a decision at all on this than to make a bad decision. And although I'm a stage detached from it, this is David's point, I think, about this sort of assumption that extensions of time will be sought and granted. It's encouraging but relatively rare to see the local authority go back and say, I'm sorry, Natural England, we consulted you, you didn't come back in time, we're pressing ahead and we're going to make a decision. And not say, oh, we need an extension of time to get so the consultee can do it. No, if the consultee thinks it's that important, the consultee can resource it and give us an answer. And if it's not, we're going to go ahead and make a decision. And when we tell Natural England that we've done it and they go, but, you say, well, then apply more resource. If it was that important, you would have come back. It's not. It was a while ago now, but I saw an interesting appeal decision where the local authority, it was all about the amount of proportion of affordable housing to be provided. And the inspector said that the local authority had effectively loaded the scheme with so many fundamentally unnecessary obligations to produce all sorts of pre-commencement, pre-start, pre-build, pre-whatever reports into all sorts of bits and pieces, all of which were going to cost the developer money, that they'd sucked all of the value out of it. And as a result of asking them to do a third archaeological survey before they do anything, they said, you're not getting any affordable housing. That's on you. Whether it was an officer or members is not here there, but just trying to sort of seek perfection in something and make sure everything's covered. It all pushes in the wrong direction. You go, well, you've got no affordable housing in this scheme now, but the consultants are going to make a fortune out of all these unnecessary reports. So, there's a few bits and pieces there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an interesting comment coming from Jonathan Finch. Jonathan, I won't invite you to speak, but I will summarise because it's relevant to something you said earlier, Sam, and I'll come on to you before I say that. So I'll read this out before I come on to you. Is that talking about committee members being politicised, should officers or LPA solicitors be able to more robustly challenge members to ensure consistent decision making? And is there any way of holding, this is my addition, is there any way of holding those elected members to account? Sam, your thoughts on that one?
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, I think probably, as you said, it's gone a bit off, like a bit of a rambly question, but I think a few comments from me. Having been both sides, been local authority side and gone client side, I had no idea how much all the technical information costs, because I think it's information that's not shared. There is this kind of commercial confidentiality from developers, and I think there needs to be a more open dialogue. So when and I think there's more sharing of the implications and costs of, if you ask for an archaeology survey, how many thousands of pounds it is, how many thousands of pounds it is for ecology. So I think there needs to be more of a dialogue between developers and planners so that they can understand that. Definitely picking up Duncan's point about the risk aversion and the going for perfection. It seems that planners have kind of a lot of planners have moved away from their role as planners, and that is the balancing. That is the ability to take all of the different issues and to make a decision. And a lot of planners, unfortunately, now do just seem to be the post holders, and they won't push back against the consultees. And I think that they need to be empowered and supported by their senior officers and senior members to do that where it's needed. In terms of holding members to account, obviously the political element is the biggest issue, and we've seen time and time again, allocated sites, no technical objections, officers in support, when members will say, give us a reason to refuse it, we must come up with a refusal reason, and that's happened to a client recently. And they're an RP, they're a registered provider delivering, 100% affordable housing, and it still got refused, and they now need to go to appeal. And we've seen other examples, members need to be held to account when they are overriding their officers. And I think that's something that isn't really monitored other than appeal records. and costs. And to be honest, office members don't really seem to be too worried when that happens, because they just say, oh, well, it's the inspectorate not listening to the local requirements. So I think there's lots of issues there. And in terms of what we can do, I think we need to try and get away from this us and them approach with officers. There's some really good officers. You want to assume most officers want development to happen. We need to give them the information, the language we use, so they can then go to their members and their parish councils and actually extol the benefits of development. So I think there's lots we can all be doing, and I think maybe we need to rephrase it and reframe the approach to housing and how it's looked at and development.
Sorry, I was thinking there, but realised I was on mute as well. The interesting thing that in the way you sum that up is that it's almost as though that if we've done the work up front, if we work with the local authority, they can become almost a sales force for an idea if they're behind it, if they're communicating it, if they're enthusiastic. Yeah. Again, that's a lot of work. A lot of this, where this seems to be leading, is back into the consultation realm, which has, I can see some benefits, but also it has some downsides in terms of timeframes and cost. How far do you go with it? And ideally, yeah, it's great if we're building 250 houses over the next 5 years on a big Cranbrook kind of site, then that's something that can be resourced. It's on the smaller sort of 10, 20, 30 unit schemes. There is, developers don't all drive around in Bentleys. So it's how we get that balance between having a certainty of time frame and communicating through as a process rather than an us and them approach. I'm rambling now, so I'll shut up.
Only your salesperson point, though, I do pick up on. I think officers work so closely with the applicants throughout the process. Hopefully they build up a good working relationship and get the information together. They get to planning committee, and there's a bit of a pride in those officers wanting to get the application through because they've got it to that stage and worked it to that point. But there is a balance to be struck, and I'm only just mentioning this, that we've got to be careful that we do give the balanced approach and explain to members, well, these are the policies that we've judged this against. But our solicitors are always saying you've got to give the opportunity for members to be able to say, well, actually, we pitch the balance slightly different from the way you have as officers, and we're going to come down on this side. So I like the officers to be proud of their schemes and to be able to present them clearly, but they've got to be a little bit wary about being too one-sided with it.
No, that's a fair point. Yeah, ultimately you are impartial. So I get that.